Hey guys, welcome back. So in the previous video, we set up the display of our player conditions. We have our health, energy, and mood. We can jump and affect our energy. So we have done our first bit of work inside of UMG and created our health, energy, and mood display. Up next, we are going to create the display of our inventory menu. So we're going to set that up. But before we jump into working inside the inventory menu, we are going to be working inside the inventory slot first. So the individual slots that populate our inventory, we're going to start with that first. So let's go ahead and inside of our UMG folder, let's open up the inventory slot widget blueprint. So go ahead and double click and open it up and make sure that you are on the designer tab. And what we're going to do for this, we're going to hop over to the hierarchy. By default, you are using a canvas panel with all of your newly created widget blueprints. We do not need a canvas panel. And a canvas panel in short, essentially allows for absolute layout. We don't need absolute layout in this instance because it's going to be a child of another widget blueprint anyway. So we can delete the canvas panel as we don't need absolute layout. So what we're going to do is hop up to the common section and we're going to grab a button because we need buttons inside of our inventory. So let's grab a button. So left click and drag that button and place it on top of our inventory slot. It's going to give us a giant button in our designer graph here. Don't worry, these will all get scaled down once we put them inside our quote unquote bag. So the next thing that we need is an image. So let's grab an image and let's place that on top of our button. So this is the thumbnail that will appear on top of our button. Now our image is super tiny by default. So let's make some changes to it. Let's select our image and then over in the details panel for the image, if we select it, whoops. Let's go to the slot section for the horizontal alignment and vertical alignment. Let's set these both to fill. So that's going to fill our button with this particular image. Now this image, we don't know what this image is going to be because this inventory slot inside of our bag could contain any type of pickup. This image is going to be a variable. So similar to what we did with our player condition display, we're going to have to bind this image to a variable. Or in this instance, not necessarily a variable. We're going to have to bind it, but we're going to have to bind it to a function to get from our variable. So in the details panel with the image selected, we're going to go to brush. And if you expand it, you can see under image, you can click an image here and that will assign it. Again, this will get scaled down. But as I mentioned, we can't specify it here because we don't know what this is going to be. So let me reset this and let's click this bind option. So before we were binding through subobject properties, we're going to use a function now. So let's create a binding. It's going to open up a new graph for us and create a function for us called getBrush. And in order to determine what image is being represented on our top of our button here, we're going to need to create a variable. So we're going to go to the My Blueprint panel and let's click the Add Variable button. And we're going to call this pickup image. So this is the pickup image, the inventory item from our pickup. And let's go down to the details panel under variable type. Let's click this drop down and change this to a texture 2D. So make sure that we choose the object reference texture 2D, like so. And then let's compile. And let's left click and drag this pickup image into the graph by holding Control, left click, and drag that into the graph. It's going to give us a getter. And once we get from it, we can't necessarily plug this straight in because it says texture 2D reference is not compatible with slate brush structure. So in order to convert this to a brush, we can drag off this and release and search for make brush from texture. So this function will take our texture and turn it into a brush, which we can then display on top of our button. So make brush from texture. It's going to ask for width and height. Don't worry about that. We've already going to specify that inside of the image. So we can leave it at 0, 0. That's fine. And then we take our return value and just plug that into the return value here. So I'm going to rename this function actually over in the details or My Blueprint panel. I'm going to select it, hit F2. I'm going to say get inventory image. So get inventory image is the name of this function, because that's essentially what we are doing. And I'm going to compile and go back to the designer tab. And that function has now been bound for us. So I think we are good on setting up the image. I don't think there's anything else that we need to do. Let me just double check. Nope, I think that's it. Let's go up to the button itself, because there's some modifications that we need to make to it. So I'm going to hop over to the details panel. I'm going to expand the style section. Now, if you look under style, there's a bunch of different options for normal, hovered, pressed. And as you may have kind of guessed, these are the options for when you are hovering over the button, when it looks like normally, when it's pressed. You can also assign sounds, etc. For our purposes, all we're going to worry about is the normal and hover state of our button. So I'm going to expand normal. And we're going to go down to the tint section. As you can see, you can assign images, but we're going to use tint for this. So I'm going to click the color picker here. And normally our button is going to appear kind of grayed out. That's what it looks like normally. So I'm going to hit OK. And that's all we need to do for normal. So I'm going to collapse that. I'm going to open up hovered and do the same thing for tint. So when I hover over this, we're actually going to want this to appear like yellowish when we hover over it. But before I hit OK, I'm going to grab the new color that we are going to assign, and drag this to the color bar so that we can save this color for reference later. When we begin creating the action menu that appears after we click on this button, so we've clicked on the item in our inventory, we'll get a pop-up that tells us what we can do with it. We're going to want to have this same highlight. So that's why we're saving it here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK to assign the new button color, like so. And that's all we need to do for the style. That's all we're going to be doing. You can come back later and assign sounds if you'd like. But for right now, I think we're good. The next thing that we need to do is set up the behavior of this button. So currently, if we go down to the behavior section for the button, you can see that it is always enabled. We only want this button to be enabled when it is populated with something inside of our inventory. So we're going to uncheck is enabled. Oops. Uncheck is enabled. And we're going to create another binding. So let's click the drop down and let's create a binding for this. So create binding. It's going to open up a new graph for us. And it's asking for a Boolean value. So is this button, should it be enabled or not? To determine if this button should be enabled, all we're going to do is hold Control and drag our pickup image in to the graph. So we have a getter. So we are getting the pickup image. We're going to drag off this and search for is valid. So this is valid function will tell us if this particular property is non-null. So let's go ahead and select this. Gives us a Boolean return. Let's connect it to that like so. And let's rename this in the My Blueprint panel as well. I'm going to hit F2. Let's rename it to what are we going to call it? Inventory. We'll just call it inventory check. Make sure that there's something there like so. Let's compile. And then let's go back to the designer tab. Make sure that that has been applied, which it has. So we've set up our button. We've set up our image. We do need to set up what happens when the player, when we have determined that this button should be enabled and the player actually clicks on this button. So let's go to the graph tab to do that. We're going to hop over to the graph tab. And, excuse me, on the graph tab, we are currently inside one of our functions. We need to go to the event graph. So let's go to the event graph. And inside here, we can kill these two nodes. We're not going to be using these. So let's select all those and hit delete. And all we need to do is let's go to our button inside of our My Blueprint panel. If we go down to the details panel, there's the ability to add events for when the button is clicked, pressed, or released. For our purposes, we're going to use on clicked, so called when the button is clicked. So click this plus sign. It's going to add a new node to the graph for us. And this is the script that occurs whenever the player clicks on the button. So for this, what we're going to do is create an event dispatcher. So let's go over to the My Blueprint panel and create an event dispatcher. So let's click this option here. And we're going to call this the button was clicked event dispatcher. Now this event dispatcher, excuse me again, this event dispatcher, if you are not familiar with what they are, what they do, essentially what we can do here is send out a signal to any other blueprints that are bound to this event, that have bound to this event. They will get the notification that the button has been clicked and then can execute their own script. So it's just another way of communicating between blueprints. So we're going to left click and drag this into the graph, and it's going to give us a context menu. Go ahead and select call. And there's one thing I forgot to do actually. Let's actually delete this. There's one, I don't think we can do it from here, can we? Let's see. Let's select the button was clicked. Let's go down to the inputs. We need to add an input for this actually. So let's select the new option. Can we do it? Oh, it does. All right, we didn't have to. Surprise, surprise. I thought I was going to have to delete it and recreate it. We need to have an input because we need to know which inventory slot, which slot inside of our inventory was clicked. We don't know that. All we're knowing is that we have clicked an inventory slot, but we don't know which one inside of our inventory was clicked. So we need to create a variable that we can pass through and tell other blueprints which inventory slot was clicked. So with our new input added, let's change the variable type to an integer. And we're going to change the name to slot clicked, like so. Let's compile. Yep, I knew that was going to happen. So it doesn't update, actually. I am going to have to delete it and re-add it, I think. So let me delete this. Let's try and drag it back in and see if it updates, which it does. So it should say slot clicked on it. Just go ahead and delete it and then redrag it back in after you've assigned the input. And what we're going to do is create one more variable. So let's go to the My Blueprint panel and click the Add Variable button. And we're going to call this variable inventory slot. And we're going to change the variable type to an integer. So an integer. And we're also going to make sure that we set this to publicly editable. So go ahead and check this box here. Now with that, we can left click and drag our inventory slot variable that we just created and drop that on top of slot clicked, like so. And then we can take our button event here and connect that to the event dispatcher. That's really all the script that we're going to need. So let's add a comment around this and hit C. Inventory slot was clicked. And what we've done by making this variable publicly editable is that when we implement this inventory slot widget inside of our main inventory, I'm doing air quotes, inventory bag, we can define its position through this variable inside of the inventory menu. And it'll all start to make sense a little bit more once we start working on our inventory menu now. So we're about 14 minutes in. We're going to do our inventory menu, the visual layout, and then we're probably going to pause because we don't want these videos to get too long. So let's compile and save and then close this blueprint and start working on our inventory menu. So let's go ahead and open up our Game HUD widget blueprint in the content browser and make sure that we are on the Designer tab. And we've already created our player condition or our player status. So what we're going to do now is let's go to the palette window. And we're going to scroll down under panel and we're going to find a vertical box. So let's grab a vertical box, left click, and drag and drop that on top of our canvas panel. Then we're going to select the vertical box and we're going to rename this in the details panel to inventory menu, like so. We're also going to check this is variable option here. This will make it publicly editable on our graph so that it is exposed and we can access its properties from the graph. So let's go ahead and make sure that's checked. And the next thing that we're going to do is add a text block to this inventory menu. So let's go up and let's choose text, left click, and drag that onto our inventory menu like so. So we've added text to it. And then finally, what we're going to do is use the uniform grid panel. So we're going to scroll down in the panel section, find the uniform grid panel, left click, and drag that into our inventory menu. So we have text, we have uniform grid panel, and we have our inventory menu. Now, before we do anything further, I wanted to kind of pause for a second to talk about something that's very important when working with canvas panels inside UMG. Let me go ahead and bring up my notes here so I can show this to you as well, because this is kind of important. Let me bring it up. Where is it? There it is. So what we have done with our player status, we've decided this is where we want it to appear. So all is good. It displayed just fine for us. However, if we want to take our inventory menu here, as I resize it a little bit, and say we wanted to move it to this side of the screen, there's some things that we need to do to make sure that it always appears on this side of the screen. So right now it looks fine. If we played in the game, it would look fine. However, if we were playing on an iPhone 5S in portrait, you see that our inventory widget is getting kicked off screen. So we need to fix that. So let's go back and set our size back to 720. To fix that, we're going to use anchors. And let me drag in my notes here. So if you take a look at the documentation under UMG, under UMG UI Designer Guide, there's a section for anchors. It's pretty important. It walks you through more in depth how anchors work. So you can kind of take this as a refresher after I give you a brief explanation of what it is. But that is an excellent source for learning more about anchors. Essentially what we need to do is go to the details panel. There's a drop down here for anchors, and it's reflected by this little medallion up here in the upper left. If we click this drop down, we can specify where we want this particular widget to be anchored to relatively to. So for our purposes, I mean, we could do it in the center, we could do it in the top. For our purposes, we're going to anchor it to the middle right, like so. So go ahead and select this. You will see that the medallion now jumps to this side, letting us know that this widget is anchored relative to this position. So if we change the screen size now to an iPhone 5S in portrait, you can see that it still remains on screen. So that is something I kind of wanted to talk about really quickly, because anchors are pretty important when you're working on canvas panels, that is where anchoring is done, is on canvas panels. But it's pretty important to remember to anchor your widgets if you are ever creating a UI element and your widget isn't on screen for some reason and you can't figure out why. It's probably because it hasn't been anchored to a specific position that you've moved it. So with that, let me set this back to 720, like so. And let's resize our inventory menu here. So I'm going to resize this to something like this for now and just move it over here. And we need to add a couple more things to this. Let's see. Let's go to the palette. And so far we have been working with common widgets and panel widgets. But if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a user created section. If I expand that, there is our widget blueprints that we have created, and specifically our inventory slot. So we can take this widget blueprint and make it a child of this, this widget blueprint. So let's drag our inventory slot, left click, and drag that into our uniform grid panel. And when we do so, now we have an individual slot inside of our bag. So we've created one, but we've got to add the remaining slots inside of our bag. So I'm going to first rename this for clarity. You can select it and hit F2. I'm going to rename this to slot underscore 0. So this is slot underscore 0. Going to select this and hit Control C, select our uniform grid panel, and hit Control V 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that'll give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inventory slots. Now for our purposes, we're only going to be dealing with the 5 slots. However, you could add as many slots as you want for your inventory system to have. But to get started, we're just going to use these 5 slots. So let me go ahead and rename all of these just for consistency. We're going to call this one slot underscore 1. Going to select the next one, slot underscore 2. Just hitting F2 on all of these, slot underscore 3. And F2, slot underscore 4. So now that we have all of those renamed, there's some changes that we need to make to these. Probably the most important, if we select slot underscore 0, when you hop over to the details panel, if we take a look under the slot section, there's what am I trying to say here? Horizontal alignment and vertical alignment properties where we can set these to fill. We're going to set these all as one unit in a moment. But I wanted to talk about row, column, and our publicly exposed inventory slot. So right now we are at row 0, column 0, and our inventory slot is defaulted to 0, so that's all fine. However, if we select the next inventory slot widget, it is currently set to the same values. We need to change these. So as you may have guessed, slot 1 is going to be sitting in row 1 or row 0, column 1. So that'll kick it over. And it's going to be inventory slot 1. So we are dealing with one row with multiple columns. Again, you could have multiple rows and multiple columns depending on your inventory size. We're going to select slot 2 and change column to column 2 and inventory slot 2. You can see that our inventory is updating. We're going to go to slot 3 and change column to 3, inventory slot to 3. We're going to go to slot 4, column 4, inventory slot 4. So our inventory is set up. There's some spacing and everything in between this that we'll fix here before we wrap up this video. Let's go ahead and start off by selecting all of our inventory slots here. So I'm holding Shift to select all of those. And in the layout, let's set the horizontal alignment to fill. And the vertical alignment, we're going to set that to fill as well. We're then going to select our uniform grid panel. Now this is where if you are having multiple rows, you would probably want to omit this step. But for our purposes, since we're going to be using just the one row, I'm going to set the size to fill as well. So that will fill out the entire uniform grid panel. So with that, let's check the next thing we need to do. Let's select our text and let's rename this actually to something better than text block. Let's call it inventory, like so. And let's center it up by clicking the horizontal alignment text center here. So we got a header for our inventory. And let's resize our inventory menu. So I'm going to select the inventory menu in the hierarchy and just pull this up just a little bit so it looks something like that. So I think that's good. So the last thing that we're going to do in this video before we wrap is bind the is enabled. So for our behavior, we're going to bind our is enabled property. And we're also going to bind the visibility property. So by default, we don't want our inventory to be enabled. We probably don't want it to be visible as well. So we're going to bind those two properties. So we're going to uncheck is enabled. And we're going to set visibility to hidden by default. And then we're going to create some bindings for these. So we're going to go over to the graph. And on the graph, what we're going to do is create some variables. So the first one that we're going to need to create in the My Blueprint panel, let's click the Add Variable button. First variable we're going to create is called Activate Inventory. So this allows us to toggle on the is enabled property of our inventory. The next one that we're going to create, let's create another variable. And this one's going to be called Inventory Visible. And we need to change the variable type for this one. So let's click the drop down in the details panel here. And let's change this to, if we search for eSlate visibility, there it is. So eSlate visibility. As I mentioned, UMG is built upon Slate, so we are accessing Slate functionality here. So let's go ahead and select this eSlate visibility option. And if we compile now, if we hit compile, we can now set the default values for these. So for the inventory visible, by default, this value should be hidden. And our activate inventory, by default, again, we want the player to be able to activate their inventory by default. So we're going to check this to true. So we're going to compile again, hop back over to the designer tab and assign those properties. So let's go to the behavior, make sure that our inventory is selected, inventory menu. Let's go to the behavior, let's click our drop down. And now we have the ability to assign our property that we just created. So go ahead and select Activate Inventory. And then for visibility, let's click our drop down and let's set that to Inventory Visible. So let's compile and save. And let's pause here. We're about 25 minutes in now. So I think this is a good point to stop. We've made a lot of work on our inventory system. I'd like to pause before we go any further. So what we've done is we've set up our inventory slot widget blueprint. So we have the button and the image that will appear upon it. We also set up what happens when the player clicks on the button. We've also defined the position inside the inventory with this inventory slot publicly exposed variable inside of our game HUD. We've then created our inventory menu and populated it with all of our individual slots. As I mentioned, that inventory slot variable that we created allows us to define its position inside the inventory. So let's pause here, and in the next video, we will continue on the inventory system by creating the pop-up that appears when you click on one of the buttons inside of the inventory. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.